It's a name that everyone knows, right? The Titanic. It was a story of ambition so big they called the ship Unsinkable. And of course, a story of a tragedy so deep it's haunted us for more than 100 years. So today, we're going to peel back the layers of myth and legend to get to the real story of the RMS Titanic. Okay, so I want you to picture this. It's a freezing, moonless night, and you're out in the middle of the North Atlantic. The ocean, it's just eerily calm, the air is completely still, and the largest moving object ever built by human hands is just slicing through the darkness. The time, it's exactly 11:39 p.m. And then, just like that, the silence is shattered. High up in the crow's nest, a lookout named Frederick Fleet screams 3 words into a phone, a warning that would signal the beginning of the end for the ship they swore could never sink. So, let's start right there, at the moment of collision. To really get a handle on this tragedy, we're going to start right at the impact. We'll look at what happened in that exact moment, and then we'll rewind the clock to see how this magnificent ship, this symbol of a whole new era, ended up in so much trouble. It all happened so incredibly fast. I mean, from the second that Iceberg is spotted, the crew has less than a minute. You hear 3 bells ring out, a frantic call is made to the bridge, an order is shouted to turn the ship, but it's too late. By 11:40 p.m., the Titanic is grinding against this massive iceberg for a mere 10 seconds. And a lot of people think it ripped this huge gash in the side, but that's not what happened. It actually punched a bunch of smaller holes below the waterline. And just like that, the ship's fate was sealed, all in less time than it takes to make a cup of tea. So the big question is, how did this marvel of engineering even get there? Let's go back to the beginning, to its celebrated launch, and trace the journey of the quote-unquote unsinkable ship. So on April 10th, 1912, it felt like the whole world was watching as the RMS Titanic set sail from England. On board, you had this incredible mix of people. I mean, literally a cross-section of society. You had some of the wealthiest people on the planet, and right alongside them, some of the poorest immigrants, all of them dreaming of a new life in America. And the man in charge? The very experienced, veteran of the seas, Captain Edward John Smith. And you have to understand, this wasn't just a ship. It was a massive statement. Back then, it cost $7.5 million to build. Now, that might not sound like a crazy number today, but in today's money, we're talking about a staggering $400 million. It was, for all intents and purposes, a floating palace. And the luxury on the inside? It was just unbelievable. I mean, we're talking about a grand staircase that looked like it was ripped straight out of a palace, a heated swimming pool on a ship in 1912, a full gymnasium, Turkish baths, these incredible opulent dining rooms. See, it wasn't just a way to get from A to B, it was designed to be the absolute peak of comfort and luxury at sea. Okay, now this is where things get really interesting. The huge gap between what people believed and what was actually true. The Titanic was sold to the world as unsinkable, right? And for good reason on paper. It had this advanced double-bottomed hull and 16 watertight compartments. The whole idea was that it could stay afloat even if 4 of those compartments flooded. 4! But here's the fatal flaw. The iceberg didn't hit the bottom. It scraped along the side of the ship, where the hull was just a single layer of steel. And it didn't breach 4 compartments, it breached 6. That pushed it past the breaking point. The unsinkable ship had a secret, fatal weakness. But, this disaster wasn't just about a design flaw. That's only part of the story. It was also a story of human error, a story of clear, repeated warnings that were, tragically, just ignored. And this timeline really lays it all out, plain and simple. The warnings about ice, they started coming in 2 days before the collision. Then, on the actual day of the disaster, April 14th, the Titanic's radio operators got at least seven separate, distinct warnings about massive ice fields directly in their path. It's almost hard to believe. So what do you think they did in response to those 7 warnings? Did they slow down? Did they stop? Nope. They did nothing. The Titanic just kept racing towards New York at nearly 22 knots. That's about 40 kilometers an hour. Now, some people say there was pressure to set a new speed record on its maiden voyage. Whatever the reason was, the decision to just keep going, full steam ahead, into a known ice field, it was the single biggest mistake of all.
All right, so let's go back to that fateful night. We've seen the moment of impact and we've seen the mistakes that led the ship there. Now let's dive into the ship's final desperate hours.
So how does an unsinkable ship sink? Well, it was like a grim, unstoppable chain reaction. Once those 6 forward compartments were breached, the ship was already past its safety limit. The sheer weight of all that water started pulling the front of the ship, the bow, down into the ocean. And as it dipped, water began to spill over the tops of the watertight walls into the next compartment. And then the next, and the next. It's exactly like filling up an ice cube tray, one section at a time. Once that process started, there was no stopping it. The sinking was inevitable. And we have to remember who was on board. We're talking about roughly 2,200 people, passengers and crew. That's 2,200 souls out there in the middle of the freezing Atlantic Ocean. Just think about that number for a second. Now, for all those 2,200 people, the ship had 20 lifeboats, and those lifeboats had a total capacity for only about 1,200. This chart right here just lays out the chilling math of the whole disaster. You just can't argue with these numbers. Even if the evacuation had gone perfectly without a single hitch, there was only room in the lifeboats for a little more than half the people on board. The problem was, the safety regulations were totally outdated. They just hadn't kept up with how massive these new ships were. So long before the Titanic ever hit an iceberg, a tragedy was literally built right into its design. In those final hours, it was just chaos. Pure chaos. A distress call went out, sure, but the nearest ship that responded, the Carpathia, was more than 3 hours away. And think about this. So many people still believed the ship was unsinkable that they didn't even want to get into the lifeboats at first. It's crazy. The very first lifeboat, which could hold 65 people, was launched with only 28 on board. By 2:05 in the morning, the last boat was gone, and over 1,500 people were left behind. Just 15 minutes after that, the great ship broke in two and vanished beneath the waves.
You know, the sinking of the Titanic wasn't just some historical event that we read about in books. It was a massive wake-up call, one that completely changed the world of maritime safety forever. So let's talk about that legacy and the lessons that were learned. So this is the question that haunted everyone after the disaster. It's the one that investigators kept coming back to. Could more lives have been saved? And the answer they found was a heartbreaking yes. The investigations that followed uncovered just a cascade of failures. It's infuriating, really. The most tragic part? A ship called the SS Californian was stopped in the ice just 37 kilometers away, but its radio operator had gone to bed. The crew on the Californian actually saw the Titanic's distress rockets, but their captain just brushed them off, thinking they were company fireworks. On top of that, you had the lifeboat shortage, and to make matters worse, a scheduled safety drill had been canceled earlier. Nobody knew what to do. It was just this tragic domino effect of failure on almost every single level imaginable. But here's the silver lining, if you can call it that. Out of this horrible tragedy came some really profound, lasting change. The International Ice Patrol was created. Its whole job is to track icebergs in the North Atlantic. And the very first SOLACE Treaty, which stands for Safety of Life at Sea, was signed. This new law made 24-hour radio watches mandatory. And most important of all, it required every single ship to carry enough lifeboats for every single person on board. It was a lesson learned the hard way, but the victims of the Titanic did not die in vain. For 73 long years, the Titanic was just lost, a ghost in the deep ocean. But then, in 1985, an expedition finally found it, lying nearly 4,000 meters, that's 2.5 miles, down on the ocean floor. Today, its resting place is rightly treated as a memorial, a grave site for the more than 1,500 people who went down with the ship. But here's a startling thought. Time is actually running out for the wreck itself. There are these iron-eating bacteria that are literally consuming the hull, and scientists predict that by as early as 2030, there might not be nothing left of it at all. It will have just vanished. And that leaves us with one final, crucial question. When the ship itself is completely gone, dissolved back into the ocean, what lessons from this story, lessons about ambition, about human error, about courage, what lessons will we, all of us, choose to remember?